Europe's architecture. So in Berlin, about 80% of Berlin's city center was destroyed in the Second World War. The damage caused in the war is still visible everywhere in the city. So once you know what you're looking for, it's actually very difficult not to see all the history and destruction. The majority of those buildings can be found in East Berlin. The socialist regime did not have enough money and often also simply didn't care to renovate the older parts of the city. So in the East is more the destruction and the damage, where in the West, what you're looking at right now is prettier and the architecture is nicer on the eyes and renovated. So pretty. Berlin is essentially a creation of modern times, from a small trading town into the capital of Germany, of which the architecture constantly changed throughout history. As soon as Hitler came to power in 1933, modernist architecture was put to a halt. The new regime shut down one of the most influential forces in 20th century architecture, especially modernism. The wall, however, turned Berlin into a divided city, compromising of two separate cities that clash in economic and ideological systems between the East and the West. So here in these columns, you could see bullet holes clearly. They had these all over the buildings, and all of the architecture just looked decrepit, just like what you're seeing now, because it was just torn apart during the Second World War. And yeah, the Europeans like to keep it that way because they're proud of their history, and it's much different from New York because everything we have is so new, and you don't realize how new America is until you see how old Europe is and how into their history they are. So here's Dresden. So in Dresden, there's a lot of Baroque architecture, which is the building style of the Baroque era, which began in late 16th century Italy, actually, that took the Roman vocabulary of Renaissance architecture and used it in a new rhetorical and theatrical fashion. It was used often to express the triumph of the Catholic Church and the absolutist state. It was characterized by new explorations of form, light, and shadow, and it used a lot of dramatic intensity. Dresden is also very similar to Prague, unlike what we saw in Germany was Berlin. So Dresden and Berlin are very different, but Prague and Dresden are very similar in architectural styles. Many architectural gems from the Gothic, Renaissance, and Baroque era remain intact because the city was not rebuilt like most of the European capital cities during the 18th or 19th centuries, when it was only a provincial town in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Also, Prague was spared the tragic fate of cities such as Dresden during World War II. So that's a difference. To be sure, Prague is a sort of museum of architecture under the open sky. So this is the Gothic era, what you're looking at now. So the largest urban historical center listed is a well-preserved area, covers 900 hectares that includes some of 4,000 monuments. So all of Prague, from the castles all the way down, were just beautiful, and like these old Baroque and Gothic and Renaissance eras, and it was just amazing to see all the history walking down the streets. So the underground city of Prague was built in 1190. So this was a really long time ago. It was actually how people lived in these stone, decrepit looking houses without even ceilings. They had to add ceilings. But what happened was they wanted to move the city of Prague up 25 feet, so they just told all the citizens to throw their garbage and whatever they didn't need anymore outside of their window to raise the level eventually. So this is just the John Lennon wall, which is funny because John Lennon actually was never there, but it was just a symbol of freedom in Prague. Once he was shot, they built the wall. So here in the Bones Church, they have a chandelier that is made of every bone in the human body, and in the whole church is 40,000 people and skulls in the whole church, and it was real human bones of victims of a plague. So in Bratislava, we saw the Devon Castle, which is a site that's been settled since the Neolithic Age and fortified since the Bronze and Iron Age, and later by the Celts and the Romans.
That's pretty cool. We're like waiting for water to drop.
So the castle stands just inside Slovak territory on the frontier between Slovakia and Austria, and runs along the Morava River. Vienna, my favorite. So Vienna is the art capital of the world, and it heavily shows that in the architecture. The architecture is very artsy, and there's sculptures everywhere, and it's very creative and very old, but also very modern. And there's sculptures and art everywhere, and music is always playing, and it's a very livable city, I found. This is the library that reminded me of Beauty and the Beast. It was so magical, and there was artifacts from Mozart that he actually wrote in, and it was very surreal, and you just realize how old all of these books are, and you're standing in the presence of like what Google used to be, and it's just amazing to feel the energy from the history within the books. So that's architecture in Europe. Hope you enjoyed.